Imagine walking into an underground lab in the United States. A place so secret that even the guards outside don't know what's really happening inside. Behind steel doors and flickering fluorescent lights, machines hum, printers roar, and identities are created out of thin air. Not fake names on a screen, but passports. Realistic, scannable, almost impossible to detect. These passports don't belong to ordinary people. They belong to spies, criminals, fugitives, ghosts who should not exist, yet travel freely across borders as if they were invisible. But what happens when one undercover agent risks everything to expose this hidden empire? When he steps into a world where a single wrong move could mean a bullet in the dark? What if I told you that this isn't just a movie script, it's based on a secret war? One that governments don't want you to know about? Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you're about to enter the dangerous story of fake passports, billion-dollar networks, jungle ambushes, and betrayals so deep they could bring nations to their knees.
A city that never sleeps, yet hides. New York was a city that lived to lives. On the surface, it was all lights, skyscrapers, Wall Street deals, and Times Square dreams. But beneath that glitter was another city, one built on shadows. Here, in the basements of Queens and the back alleys of Brooklyn, an entire world thrived beyond the reach of law enforcement. It was a world where rules bent, identities shifted, and money bought new lives. And at the very heart of this underground empire stood one product more valuable than drugs, more powerful than guns, and more dangerous than bombs: the fake passport. The golden key airports looked like fortresses, metal detectors, armed guards, biometric scanners, endless security checks. But the true game was never about breaking through the walls. The real game was walking straight through the gates, invisible and unquestioned. A real U.S. passport wasn't just a travel document. It was a golden key that opened more than 150 doors across the globe. And if a forged passport was indistinguishable from the real one, then it wasn't a piece of paper, it was a whole new life for sale. The first whisper. Every big story begins with a whisper. For investigative journalist David Miller, that whisper came one cold December night in 2019. An anonymous email landed in his inbox with a single chilling line: "They are not just fakes, they're better than the real ones." Attached was a scan of an American passport. David had seen counterfeits before: bad laminations, wrong colors, misspelled names, but this looked flawless. The chip, the barcode, the hologram, everything matched. The only problem was that this person didn't exist in US records. At the bottom of the email was one more line: "If you want the truth, follow the trail in Queens."
Queens, where borders don't matter. Queens was one of the most diverse places in America. Every street echoed with a different language: Spanish, Urdu, Mandarin, Russian. Immigrants from every corner of the globe lived there, and with them came opportunities for trade, both legal and illegal. David's trail led him to a small, run-down electronics shop. By day, it repaired phones. By night, it became something else entirely. Hidden beneath it was a basement lab, a secret factory, where some of the world's most dangerous passports were being made. The architects of the lie. The lab was run by two men. One, Alexander Volkov, a former Soviet intelligence officer who defected to the US after the Cold War. He knew exactly how governments built their security systems and, more importantly, how to break them. 2. Chen Wei, a Chinese tech prodigy who had done the impossible. He cracked the encryption codes of American e-passports. Together, they had built a network that stretched far beyond New York, reaching Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Perfect forgeries. Passports had been faked for decades, but always poorly. Blurry inks, mismatched barcodes, obvious mistakes. But Volkov and Chen's passports were different. Holograms copied to perfection. RFID chips cloned with real encryption codes. Database entries hacked, so that when scanned, the system confirmed the identity as real. These weren't forgeries. They were manufactured identities. Dangerous clients. This wasn't just about poor migrants trying to cross borders. Their client list was darker. Drug lords, terrorist operatives, corrupt businessmen evading sanctions, even politicians covering their tracks. David realized he wasn't looking at a crime ring. He was staring into a global security threat. The meeting. Through his anonymous source, David arranged to meet a middleman in a dingy diner. The man, nervous and constantly glancing around, slid a brown envelope across the table. Inside was a flawless American passport. Price is $50,000. With this, you can be whoever you want. David's pulse quickened. He was holding one of the world's most powerful weapons into the basement. Days later, David's investigation took him inside the warehouse itself. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Inside, it was alive with machinery. Industrial printers rolled out special paper with embedded fibers. Laser cutters etched holograms. Computers hummed as coders uploaded new data into microchips. Workers moved with surgical precision, masked and gloved, like doctors in an operating room. This wasn't forgery. This was mass production.
A shadow market scale was shocking. A manager explained, 300 to 400 passports leave here every month. We don't ask who the clients are. Some pay in Bitcoin, some in gold. David realized this wasn't just about individuals, it was about networks of power buying their way past borders. The airport test David's photographer friend volunteered to test one of the passports. Nervously, he walked through JFK airport security with the fake document. The officer scanned it. The system lit up green, stamped, approved, no suspicion. David's blood ran cold. If his friend could do it, so could terrorists, arms dealers, or fugitives. The warning sign soon. David noticed he wasn't just observing, he was being observed. A black SUV followed him at night. A torn photo of his apartment appeared in his mailbox with the chilling words, "Curiosity kills." A whisper from the FBI, then came the phone call. A low, guarded voice. "We know what you're chasing. Step away, or step inside. There's no middle ground." David asked, "Are you FBI?" The voice paused. "Let's just say, we've been chasing these ghosts for years. Meet us tomorrow night." No phones, no recorders. It could have been law enforcement. It could have been a trap. But David knew one thing: he had already crossed the point of no return, a breathing city of secrets at night. As he sat at his desk, New York felt different. The skyscrapers, the subway tunnels, the neon lights, all of it hid a second city, one that didn't sleep, one that thrived in shadows. David began to type. This isn't just a story about fake passports. This is a story about how the world's strongest fortress has cracks wide enough to let anyone walk through. And the question is, who's already walked through before we noticed? A City of Shadows Part 3, the meeting in the park following night. David arrived at the designated location, a dimly lit corner of Flushing Meadows Park. The winter air carried a biting chill, and the trees cast long, skeletal shadows under the weak glow of streetlights. He had left his phone at home as instructed. No recorder, no notebook, just himself and the gnawing fear that he might never return. A figure emerged from the darkness, face partially hidden by a hood. The man stood still, scanning the area before stepping closer. His voice was calm, but heavy with authority. "You're braver than I expected, Miller. Most journalists walk away by now." David swallowed. "Are you FBI?" The man smirked slightly. "Let's just say I'm part of the hunt. And the prey you're chasing? They've been ahead of us for years." He handed David a small flash drive. "What you find here is enough to understand the scale, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. If you print this story recklessly, you won't just put yourself in danger, you'll compromise ongoing operations." David clenched the flash drive in his fist. His instincts screamed to ask more questions, but the stranger had already turned, melting back into the shadows of the park, ghosts in the system back at his apartment. David plugged the flash drive into an old laptop that wasn't connected to the internet. Paranoia had become his routine. The files contained airport footage, seized passports, and internal memos marked confidential. One video froze David in place. It showed a man in his 30s walking through Dallas International Airport. His passport scanned perfectly. The officer waved him through, and he disappeared into the crowd. Days later, the same man appeared on a most wanted list connected to a terrorist cell in Syria. The date? Just weeks before the footage. Another document detailed how forged passports had surfaced in London, Dubai, Berlin, and Toronto, all traced back to the same invisible network. The words burned into David's mind: forgeries indistinguishable from originals. The hidden network documents painted a chilling picture. This wasn't just one basement in Queens. It was a web node scattered across multiple cities, all feeding into each other like veins in a body. New York, production hub for North America. Istanbul, key transit point for passports moving into Europe and the Middle East. Hong Kong, digital operations, where hackers created synthetic database entries. Mexico City, distribution hub, funneling documents north across the US border. Each hub was compartmentalized. Workers in New York didn't know the ones in Mexico. Hackers in Hong Kong never met the smugglers in Istanbul. This separation ensured that even if one lab was busted, the rest of the body survived. The network had been built like an organism, self-healing, adaptive, nearly immortal. The price of a new iPhone memo contained a disturbing pricing sheet. It read like a black market catalog. US passport, $50,000. UK passport, $40,000 German passport, $35,000 Canadian passport, $30,000 custom identities with verified database entries, $70, 0 plus for an extra fee. Clients could request lifestyle packages, credit histories, rental records, even fake social media profiles spanning years. A complete person, fabricated from thin air. David's stomach twisted. This wasn't just forgery, it was identity engineering. The lab's code of silent curiosity pushed David to contact one of the lab's workers he had glimpsed earlier, a young man who looked more like a college student than a criminal. Through a carefully orchestrated rendezvous, he managed to speak with him privately. The worker's hands shook as he spoke. "We don't ask questions. We're told what to do, and we do it. If you ask too much, you disappear." "Disappear how?" David pressed. The man glanced around nervously. "Last year, one of the printers asked about who the passports were going to. 2 days later, police found his car burned out near the Hudson River. They said it was an accident. We knew it wasn't." The silence that followed was suffocating. "A name in the shadows before leaving." The worker whispered one last thing. "A name. Not Volkov, not Chen, but someone else. They call him the broker. He's the one who connects the labs to the clients. Nobody knows his real identity. Some say he used to work in Washington. Others say he's ex-CIA. All I know is, when the broker speaks, people listen." The name lodged itself in David's mind like a splinter. If this broker truly existed, he wasn't just a criminal middleman. He could be the missing link between the underground and the upper echelons of power. The trap closing in B now. David's life was unraveling. His editor grew suspicious of his long absences. Friends noticed his paranoia, changing routes home. Glancing over A City of Shadows Part 4. The passport on the desk. David stood frozen in the doorway of his apartment, staring at the passport lying neatly on his desk. His own face stared back at him from the photo, but the name beneath it wasn't his. The birth date was wrong. The birthplace was wrong. The life was wrong. It was a message, clear as glass. "We can erase you. We can replace you. You're not untouchable." His mind raced. Whoever had broken in didn't want his money, his possessions, or even his notes. They wanted him to know they could get inside his life as easily as they had gotten inside his home. The note beneath the passport was simple, written in bold black ink. "Use it, or lose everything." David sat down heavily on the couch. He picked up the passport, flipping through the crisp, perfect pages. Every detail was immaculate: the watermarks, the fibers in the paper, the chip embedded in the cover. If he took this to the airport right now, he could vanish into another country, another life. But that wasn't an escape. That was surrender, the weight of secrets. For the next several days, David lived like a hunted man. He changed apartments, crashing at a colleague's place under the pretense of renovations. He avoided the subway, took cabs with cash, and never walked the same street twice. Every stranger's glance felt suspicious. Every shadow seemed to move against him. He wanted to publish what he had already discovered, but the story was incomplete. Exposing the lab without understanding the network behind it would only scratch the surface, and it might spook the entire operation into disappearing before law enforcement could act. David's instincts told him he needed something bigger, something undeniable. He needed the truth about the man they called the broker. The FBI's silent watch. In a rainy Thursday night, David's anonymous contact reached out again. This time, it wasn't a voice on the phone, it was a plain envelope slid under his apartment door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the time, a place, and nothing else. The place, a parking garage in downtown Manhattan. The time, 2:00 a.m. David knew the risk. It could be a trap, but curiosity had already dragged him too far into the darkness. When he arrived, the garage was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly, casting long shadows across the concrete. A black sedan pulled up slowly. The window rolled down just enough for him to see a pair of sharp eyes. "Get in," the driver said. David hesitated, then climbed into the passenger seat. The driver looked straight ahead, hands on the wheel. His suit was crisp, his demeanor colder than steel. "You've been digging in places most people don't survive," the man said quietly. "That lab in Queens? It's just one of many. We've been tracking them for years. You're either going to get yourself killed or you're going to help us finish this." David studied him. "So you're FBI?" The man gave a thin smile. "Labels don't matter. What matters is the network you're chasing is bigger than anything you've imagined. We can't shut it down alone. We need someone who can go where we can't." Into the rabbit hole agentive. That's what he truly was. Slid a folder onto David's lap. Inside were surveillance photos, warehouses in New Jersey, a safe house in Chicago, a printing press in Los Angeles. All connected, all active. But one picture stood out. It showed a man in a tailored suit stepping out of a private jet. His face was partially obscured, but his posture radiated authority. "This," the agent said, tapping the photo, is the one they call the broker. We don't know his real name, but we know he's a linchpin. He connects the labs, the clients, the money. Without him, the network collapses. David's chest tightened. The same name the lab worker had whispered. The broker. The agent leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Find him, and you'll have your story. But once you do, there's no going back. The price of truth at night. David couldn't sleep. The rain tapped against the window, and his mind replayed everything: the lab in Queens, the flawless passports, the ghost clients slipping through airports, the passport with his own face and a false name. Every step deeper into this story was like stepping onto thinner ice. One crack, one wrong move, and he'd vanish into the frozen water with no trace. Yet the thought of walking away felt worse. He had seen too much. He knew too much. If he stopped now, he would spend the rest of his life haunted by the question: how many ghosts would keep walking through borders while he stayed silent? The broker's shadow. Next morning, David visited an old contact, a retired immigration officer named Hernandez. Over coffee in a quiet diner, he slid the photo across the table. Hernandez squinted at it, then froze. His spoon clattered against the cup. I've seen him, he whispered, not officially, but at conferences, backroom meetings, always with diplomats, always smooth talking. They said he was a consultant. A consultant for who? David pressed. Hernandez shook his head. That's the thing. Nobody ever knew. He spoke a dozen languages, moved like he belonged everywhere. If that's your broker, Miller, he's not just connected to criminals, he's connected to governments. David's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an underworld figure. This was someone who could slip between the worlds of crime and politics with ease.
A City of Shadows, Part 5. A dangerous curiosity. The folder on David's desk seemed to glow in the dim light of his apartment, as if it carried its own energy. He touched it with hesitant fingers, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. Escape or pursuit? His phone buzzed suddenly, shattering the silence. An unknown number flashed across the screen. He considered ignoring it, but curiosity outweighed caution. David Miller, he answered, his voice low. A pause, then a distorted voice came through, mechanical and cold. You have something that doesn't belong to you. David froze, his grip tightening on the phone. Who is this? The voice ignored the question. The passport, the photo. You are in possession of things that could endanger lives, yours included. Walk away now, and you will never hear from us again. Continue, and we will erase you. The line went dead. David stared at the phone in disbelief. Whoever they were watching him closely enough to know exactly what was on his desk, allies or enemies. That night, David arranged a meeting with his only reliable ally left, Clara Jensen, an investigative journalist who had worked with him several stories in the past. Clara was sharp, fearless, and had a knack for digging into the darkest corners of bureaucracy. They met in a quiet cafe on the Lower East Side. Clara arrived late, her hair damp from the drizzle outside. She slid into the booth across from him, studying his tense posture. You look like you haven't slept in days, she said. I haven't, David admitted. He slid the folder across the table. Clara flipped it open, her eyes widening as she scanned the photos and documents. This is bigger than anything we've ever touched, she whispered. Fake passports, high-level connections, and this broker guy. If half of this is true, you're sitting on dynamite. I'm sitting on a target, David corrected. They know where I live. They know what I have. I can't trust anyone, not even the FBI. I don't know if they're helping me or using me. Clara leaned closer, her voice steady. Then maybe you don't need to trust them. You need to trust me. Let's investigate this together. 2 pairs of eyes, 2 sets of skills. They can scare one of us, but both of us, that's harder. For the first time in days, David felt a flicker of hope.
A trail of shadows. Over the next week, David and Clara pieced together fragments of information. Using the photo of the broker, they tracked financial transactions, conference guest lists, and diplomatic events. His name never appeared, but his presence was always implied. A shadow moving behind the curtain. One discovery stood out: a suspicious non-profit organization based in Washington, D.C., calling itself the Global Identity Initiative. Publicly, it claimed to help displaced refugees acquire legal documents. Privately, its funding came from shell companies across 3 continents. That's our door, Clara said, pointing at the file. If the broker exists, this is where he hides. Crossing the Linnean a foggy evening, David and Clara drove to D.C. and parked across from the initiative's sleek glass office. The building looked ordinary, with polished windows and a welcoming lobby, but the longer they watched, the more out of place it seemed. Unmarked cars pulled up late at night. Men in expensive suits entered through side doors, never using the main entrance. Deliveries arrived at odd hours, carried by couriers who never stayed more than a minute. "It's not an office," Clara murmured, raising her camera. "It's a front." David felt his chest tighten. They were standing on the edge of something enormous. The lab in Queens had been just one piece of the puzzle. Here was the center, the hub. But how to get inside? The temptation of the passport back at the hotel. David stared once again at the false passport. Clara had seen it, studied it, marveled at its authenticity. "You realize what this means," she had told him earlier. "With this, you could walk right into their world. If you're holding one of their identities, you're already halfway inside." Now, alone in the room, David weighed the idea. The very tool they had given him to threaten and manipulate could become his way in. But to use it meant becoming one of them, living the lie, crossing a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. A whisper in the dark at 3 a.m. David woke to the sound of soft knocking on his hotel door. He froze, listening. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks again. He crept to the door, peering through the peephole. No one was there. Only the dimly lit hallway stretching into silence. When he opened the door, a single envelope lay on the floor. Inside was a message written on thick, expensive paper. "The broker is watching. Choose wisely." David's blood ran cold. They knew where he was again. The edge of decision be sunrise. David and Clara sat side by side at the hotel desk, the envelope between them. "They're daring you to step into the game," Clara said quietly. "If you play, you might get answers. If you don't, they'll never stop hunting you." For the first time, David wondered if the only way to expose the truth was to become part of the lie, and that thought terrified him more than anything else.
The breaking point: David had always lived in a world of words, briefings, reports, intelligence summaries, but now, everything was different. His world was no longer about interpreting shadows, it was about becoming one. As the morning light spilled through the hotel blinds, Clara studied him carefully. "You're going to use it, aren't you?" she asked. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. The passport lay on the table between them, its edges catching the light, as if mocking his hesitation. "If you cross this line," Clara warned, "you're not an analyst anymore. You're bait, and once you're inside their world, there's no turning back." David closed his eyes. Maybe that's the only way to end this. The disguise of truth. 2 nights later, David walked toward the Global Identity Initiative headquarters. His heart hammered with each step. His new identity tucked safely inside his jacket. His forged passport listed him as Daniel Moore, a trade consultant from Zurich. Every detail from the holographic overlays to the faint wear of the pages looked perfect. Too perfect. Clara trailed from a distance, camera hidden in her coat. She whispered into the comms, "Your cover is solid. Just remember, act like you belong." David swallowed hard and entered the building. Inside, the wet lobby was unerringly polished, its white marble floors gleaming under bright lights. A receptionist smiled warmly at him, scanning the passport with a sleek device. For a moment, David's pulse stopped, then green light, a soft beep. "Approved. Welcome, Mr. Moore," she said smoothly. "The board has been expecting you." The words hit him like ice. They weren't just accepting his cover, they had anticipated it. He was walking into a trap. The first meeting, a tall man in a dark suit appeared, his face shadowed but his eyes sharp as knives. He extended a hand. "Mr. Moore," he said with a faint smile, "we've heard much about you. The broker takes interest in people like you." The name made David's stomach turn, but he forced a polite nod, shaking the man's hand. As they walked deeper into the building, David noticed details that screamed secrecy: security cameras angled not at entrances, but at employees. Doors requiring biometric access. Hallways leading to locked chambers with no visible signs. This wasn't an office. It was a fortress. A glimpse of the mastermind man led David into a dimly lit conference room. On the far wall, a large screen flickered to life. The image was blurred, the voice distorted, but there was no mistaking the aura of power behind it. "The broker, Mr. Moore," the voice said, smooth and deliberate. "You stand at the threshold of a new order. Borders, nations, governments all obsolete. Identities are the currency of tomorrow, and you may prove useful in shaping that future. David's throat tightened. He wanted to scream, to rip the mask away and demand answers, but he stayed silent, nodding like a loyal recruit. The broker continued, loyalty is rewarded, betrayal is erased. Consider this your initiation. The screen went black. Initiation-suited man placed a folder in front of David. Inside were details of a mission, names, photos, flight routes. It was an operation to smuggle individuals across multiple borders using forged identities. This is your task, the man said coldly. Complete it, and you will earn the broker's trust. Fail, and you will not leave this building alive. David's blood ran cold. They weren't testing his cover. They were binding him to their network, escape or entrapment. Later that night, David returned to the hotel, his hands trembling as he tossed the folder onto the bed. Clara picked it up, flipping through the pages. This is it, she whispered. Direct evidence, names, logistics, everything. If we leak this, it could bring down the entire operation. No, David said sharply. Not yet. If we move too soon, they'll vanish. We need to know more. We need to know who the broker really is. Clara stared at him. And how do you plan to do that? David looked at the passport again. His false life, his false self, the very key that chained him deeper into the game. By playing along, he said finally, the shadows embraced night. David sat at the window, watching the city lights blur against the rain-soaked glass. He had crossed the line. There was no undoing it now. Somewhere in the city, the broker was watching, waiting, testing him. And David knew with chilling certainty the only way to expose the truth was to become the very lie he feared. A night of uneasy David barely slept after the meeting. The folder lay heavy on the nightstand, as if its contents pulsed with a life of their own. He kept waking to the thought of the distorted voice echoing in his head. Loyalty is rewarded. Betrayal is erased. At dawn, Clara found him pacing the room. You look like you've been interrogated all night, she said softly. In a way, I was. David muttered, gesturing toward the folder. They want me to run this mission. They're pulling me into their network piece by piece. And the worst part? I think they already know I'm not who I say I am. Clara frowned. Paranoia or instinct? David's silence was answer enough. Inside the folder they finally opened the folder together, spreading its contents across the table. Photos. Men and women from different countries, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, faces both hardened and desperate. Flight routes. Carefully drawn lines connecting airports in Europe, the Middle East, and North America. Passports, color prints of identities that didn't exist last week, but looked as real as any government-issued document. David traced one route with his finger. This isn't just about smuggling. It's infrastructure. They built a system. Clara leaned closer. And if we map it correctly, we'll expose every artery of the broker's network. The handler later that day, David met with the suited man again, the handler who had greeted him in the lobby. His name was never given, but David silently nicknamed him the Raven for his sharp features and predatory gaze. Mr. Moore, the Raven said smoothly, your first task is simple. You will accompany a client through customs. Your passport will be tested, as will your resolve. David stiffened, and if customs notices, the Raven's smile was thin, almost amused. They won't. We own the system. The words chilled David. Not just forged passports, not just fake identities, but insiders, officials, clerks, maybe even entire departments bought and silenced.
The client that evening, David was introduced to his client, a nervous young man with dark hair and haunted eyes. His name, according to the fake passport, was Karim El-Fayed, a Syrian refugee seeking asylum in the U.S. In reality, David suspected he was far more dangerous. Karim avoided eye contact, clutching a small leather bag like it contained his soul. You get me through, Karim muttered, his accent thick, and I disappear. That is the deal, David nodded, masking his unease. Stay calm. Follow my lead. Inside, his mind screamed, what am I escorting into the United States? Clara's warning back at the hotel. Clara confronted him again. You can't actually go through with this. If you cross customs with him, you're complicit. That's conspiracy at the federal level. David ran a hand through his hair. I don't have a choice. If I refuse, they'll know. If I succeed, I get closer to the broker. Clara's eyes softened, but her words were sharp. Just remember, David, every step you take in their world makes it harder to come back to ours. Departure. The airport was a blur of noise and movement, but to David, every sound felt magnified. The click of luggage wheels, the shuffle of boarding passes, the distant bark of a security dog. He and Kareem approached the customs line, passports in hand. David could feel the sweat gathering at the base of his neck. The officer scanned Kareem's passport first. A pause. A look. A second scan. David's heartbeat pounded in his ears. This is it. The moment the illusion breaks. Then green light. Welcome to the United States, the officer said flatly, stamping the passport. David exhaled shakily. They had passed the first gate, but the true test was only beginning.
A breath-to-short moment they cleared customs. David felt the world tilt. Relief surged for half a second, then suspicion replaced it. It was too easy. The smooth. No questions about Kareem's bag. No secondary screening. No nervous glances from the officer. It was as if the system itself had been oiled to let them slip through unnoticed. Kareem leaned toward him, whispering, "I told you. They own the gates." David didn't respond. His jaw tightened. If the cartel really had that kind of influence inside U.S. borders, then their reach wasn't just criminal, it was systemic. The pickup outside the terminal, a black SUV idled near the curb. The windows were tinted, the plates untraceable. The driver, a heavy-set man with military posture, nodded when he saw Kareem and David. "Package secured," he said in a clipped voice. "Get in." Kareem obeyed instantly, sliding into the back seat. David followed, pretending calm, but every instinct screamed at him. Inside, the driver handed David a sealed envelope. "The broker says congratulations. Consider this your initiation." David opened it carefully. Inside was a bank card, the numbers embossed with an international bank insignia, and limited credit. The driver explained, "Use it for missions, nothing else. Every transaction is monitored." David forced a small nod. Understood. Inside, though, his stomach nodded. A leash disguised as a gift. Kareem's disappearance. The SUV drove them across the city. Neon lights blurred by as they passed through districts both rich and ruined. Finally, they stopped at a nondescript building, an old warehouse near the docks. "This is where we part ways," Kareem said quietly. His eyes met David's for the first time, burning with something like gratitude or maybe warning. "You don't know what you carried across the border," Kareem whispered. "Pray you never find out." Before David could respond, armed guards appeared, ushering Kareem inside. The door slammed shut, leaving only silence and the echo of his word. Clara's voice at night. David spoke to Clara over a secure line from his hotel. His voice was low, shaken. "He's gone. They took him to some warehouse by the docks. I don't know what happens to him next." Clara's reply was calm but firm. "Then find out. Follow the threads. Every name, every building, every SUV plate, you log it. If this is the broker's network, we need evidence before it disappears back into the shadows." David rubbed his temples. "Clara, Kareem said something before they took him. He told me I don't know what I carried across the border." A pause. Clara's breath caught. "Then whatever's in that bag is bigger than we thought." Cracks in the facade. Death. Next morning, David returned to the lobby of the hidden building where he had first met the Raven. He was greeted with the same sterile efficiency. Same guards. Same silence. But something felt different. The Raven's smile was sharper, his questions heavier. "You did well," he said, folding his hands on the table. "Your client arrived without incident. Tell me, Mr. Moore, did you feel the power of what we do?" David chose his words carefully. "I felt precision, control." The Raven's eyes glimmered. "Exactly. We are not counterfeiters, Mr. Moore. We are architects. We build new lives, new nations. Governments collapse. Wars end, all because of the papers we create." David kept his expression neutral, but inside, his blood ran cold. This was no black market forgery ring. This was geopolitical engineering. A new assignment. The Raven slid another folder across the table. This one thicker, heavier. "Your next mission is more delicate. A high-profile individual requires safe passage. Failure is not an option." David opened the folder and froze. The photo staring back at him was a face he recognized. Not from the underworld, not from whispers, but from the news. A diplomat, one accused of war crimes, wanted by the International Criminal Court. And now, David was expected to escort him into the United States. A ghost from the news. David stared at the photograph in the folder until the edges blurred. He didn't need the name printed beneath it to recognize the man. Viktor Sokolov, former deputy minister of defense for a collapsing Eastern European state, accused of orchestrating massacres during the Civil War, wanted by The Hague, sanctioned by the UN, hunted by intelligence agencies across Europe, and now, somehow, he was the broker's client. David shut the folder, pulse hammering. "You can't be serious. This man is radioactive. If he sets foot in the US, every agency will be on alert." The Raven smiled faintly, as if savoring David's discomfort. That is precisely why he needs us, and why you will prove your loyalty by delivering him. Clara's outrage later that night. David met Clara on a deserted rooftop, away from the surveillance he felt pressing in on him from every side. When he revealed Sokolov's name, her reaction was immediate. Are they insane? She hissed. If Sokolov crosses into the US, it won't just be a scandal that could destabilize half of Europe. His enemies will follow. His allies will rally. Do you realize what's at stake? David leaned against the railing, staring at the city lights below. I realize that if I refuse, my cover is blown, and if I accept, I'm smuggling a war criminal into America. Clara's eyes burned. Then you need to do both. Stay in cover but find a way to sabotage the mission from the inside. David didn't answer, but the thought lodged in his mind like a splinter. How do you betray a network that never forgives betrayal? The meeting Placetwo days later. David was summoned to a private hangar at the edge of the city. Inside, a sleek jet waited, its engines idling softly. A man stepped out of the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair combed neatly back. His presence was magnetic, his stare unyielding. Mr. Moore, the man said in a thick accent, I am told you are the one who will save my life. It was Viktor Sokolov himself. David extended his hand, masking the tension that gripped him. My job is to get you where you need to be, nothing more. Sokolov chuckled, his grip crushing. Good, I prefer men who know their place. Under surveillance as they boarded the jet, David noticed something unusual, not the luxury of the interior, nor the quiet efficiency of the crew, but the presence of two silent men seated in the back watching, waiting. They weren't guards, they were observers. The broker's eyes. David understood instantly. This wasn't just about escorting Sokolov. It was a test, a measure of whether David was truly part of the network or a liability waiting to be erased. Sokolov's philosopher during the flight. Sokolov poured himself a glass of amber liquor and leaned back, studying David with unsettling calm. You know why men like me survive? He asked. David kept his tone even. Because you have resources. Sokolov shook his head slowly. Because we are necessary. Nations pretend to hate men like me, but in truth, they beg for us when their enemies grow strong. War criminals, terrorists, smugglers. We are not villains. We are tools, and tools are always needed. David forced himself to nod, though every word felt like poison in his ears. Inside, he thought, if this man sets foot in America, everything changes. I can't let it happen. Clara's message ended flight. David slipped into the lavatory and pulled out a secure device hidden in his jacket. A brief message blinked on the screen, relayed through Clara. Do not let Sokolov land in the US, whatever it takes. David stared at the words, his reflection pale in the mirror. He was trapped between two masters, the broker, who promised death for betrayal, and his own agency, demanding sabotage, and somewhere between